Welcome to Overheard at Frequency, a podcast exploring issues surrounding hearing loss. I'm your host, Colleen Chapman, and my goal is to bring timely and interesting stories about hearing science, advocacy, and innovation to our listeners. In this episode, I sit down with Shari Eberts and Gael Hannan, co-authors of Here and Beyond, Live Skillfully with Hearing Loss, available to readers this May. Shari co-produced We Hear You, a documentary on living with hearing loss that won Best Film on Disability at Cannes Film Festival this past summer. And Gael is an author and comedian and recipient of multiple honors for her hearing health advocacy in Canada. Our conversation focuses not on hearing better, but on communicating better. There are different journeys to accomplishing just that, and specific tips to helping others do the same. And they do it all with great humor and grace. Well, hi, Gael and Shari. It's so nice to be together. We have been looking forward to this for quite some time, ever since we heard the two of you were releasing a book. And so we're really glad, honored really, that we got time with both of you right at the beginning of this book being launched. So the book, as I said in the opening, is Here and Beyond, Living Skillfully with Hearing Loss. And the podcast, when we originally thought of creating this podcast, we did it for a few reasons. We wanted to keep individuals abreast of lots of different innovations that are happening in the hearing loss space: science, access, policy. And the thing about your book that adds to that great collection of knowledge is some innovative thinking around very practical things to do when you're living with hearing loss that might improve the quality of your life. But one of the things that you mention in the book is that you have a real goal of not only hearing better, but of communicating better. And the way that carries through the book is something that I would love to focus on as we talk today. So there is a great quality to the book, and that is that it's the voices of both of you, and you both have different journeys. You have different experiences and different journeys with hearing loss. So why don't we start there? Because you do share a very different pieces of those in the book. So Gael, do you want to start? Do you want to share a little bit with us about your journey?
Absolutely. Because hearing loss is the thing I like to talk about the most all the time, till the cows come home. I was born with hearing loss, and I first knew I had it when my mommy told me, congenital, don't know what caused it, but I had it. And 2 years old, my mom was a nurse and recognized that, this kid is either very stubborn or there's something else going on. And hearing loss was confirmed, very mild at the time. But this was back in the 50s. And for a child with mild hearing loss, they didn't do anything with it. And they felt that technology at the time could damage my residual hearing. So, but I grew up without a hearing aid until I was 20, but I had parents who were communicators, and they made me accountable to communicating by letting people know. Then when I was 40, a very life-changing time for me, because I was expecting my baby. And so becoming a mom, all of a sudden I was going to be responsible for someone else. And there was no resource, there was no help for that. And I had questions like, if I didn't hear my child burp, would he blow up? How would I hear him crying in the night? So for the first time ever, I reached out to other people with hearing loss. And a continuing series of life-changing moments. I went to a conference, people with hearing loss in Canada, where I live, and a woman with a baby sat down with me and calmed my fears, and that I could do this, and practical tips. And that conference was 3 days long. I walked in one person and walked out another. And I realized that I'd been carrying so much anxiety. Looking back, I realized I didn't want to have hearing loss. I felt always lesser than. And it was just an extremely life-changing time for me. And I grew so much after that. I wanted to learn everything I could about hearing loss, mine and in general. And it just led me into hearing loss advocacy. Theater is in my background, and I felt there had to be better ways to talk about hearing loss than the standard issues at the time. You will feel isolated. You will have anxiety, so I started developing content, created dramatic pieces about living with hearing loss, comedic pieces, became a writer. And I also developed severe tinnitus. I got a cochlear implant. So it truly is a journey. And looking back, I could see that it was a journey that still continues. Yeah. And I still learn about hearing loss. The more I learn, the better I communicate. And that's kind of brought me to where I am now here talking with you.
And your humor is such a gift because it brings such an important dimension to all of this. And there's a lot of it in the book. And I think that the book is such a gift to people who are, maybe someone who's at the very beginning of their hearing loss journey and can benefit greatly. But to your point, there are all different places along the journey for people to step into this book. And Shari, I know you have a very different journey than Gael had. You're both writers, thankfully for us, you're both writers. But can you share a little bit about your journey, because that brings different pieces to the stories in the book as well?
Absolutely. Thanks for having us, Colleen. It's great to be here. So I first noticed my hearing loss in my mid-20s when I was in graduate school. But my journey really started well before that, as a child watching my father struggle with his own hearing issues. And he was incredibly stigmatized by his hearing loss and would do almost anything to keep it a secret. He even grew his hair, long over his ears well after it was fashionable to do that. And I remember family parties, he would be off sort of sitting by himself with his back to the festivities. And as a child, I didn't really understand why, but when I developed my own hearing loss, I finally understood that he probably was having trouble hearing in these noisy situations. And he was probably exhausted and frustrated and just couldn't bring himself to keep trying. And he was probably so scared that somebody would discover his secret, because to him, his hearing loss was a big secret that nobody could know about. So when I first discovered my own hearing loss, I hid it, following in his footsteps. And I was embarrassed and ashamed. And I'm not really sure why, looking back. I guess maybe I just learned that stigma from him, or maybe I just felt that stigma in society in general, where people with hearing loss sometimes are still the brunt of the joke, unfortunately. And I was obviously just trying to avoid being part of that whole situation. So this lasted for many years, where I would hide my hearing loss. I remember, sneaking my hearing aids in at work before important meetings and then pulling them out, as quickly as possible afterwards. But once I had children, everything changed for me, because I saw them watching me do the same things my father had done. I would hide my hearing loss. I would laugh at jokes I hadn't heard. And I just realized I was passing on this same stigma to another generation. And I have genetic hearing loss, so I worry that I might have passed it on to them. We won't know until they're, adults as well. But I decided that this just had to stop. And so I decided I was going to finally accept my hearing loss. And so I did. And I started wearing my hearing aids all the time. I taught my family and friends how to help me hear my best. I started asking for, caption readers at the movies, and asking people to repeat themselves, or moving seats around in a restaurant. And I now refuse to let my hearing loss isolate me. And it's not always easy, but it's worth it. And like Gail, I sort of found myself turning to advocacy as well. And now I'm an advocate for people with hearing loss. I write a weekly blog at livingwithhearingloss.com. And during the pandemic, some other advocates and I put together a documentary about the hearing loss experience. And now writing Here and Beyond, Live Skillfully with Hearing Loss with the fabulous Gail Hannan has been a huge highlight of my advocacy work in hearing loss and has just been a ton of fun. But I just hope that by sharing my story, I'm going to help others live more comfortably with their own hearing issues.
Yeah, I know you just never, both of you just never stop. There's always something great comes out from you, and then something else comes out within the year. So as soon as, we heard the great news about the documentary, and then a few months later we talk and you say, Gail and I are coming out with a book. It's just, never, no rest for the weary. But so I wanted to lead from that to a piece of humor. I don't know if it's, if you wrote it or Gail, but in the book, there's a great line that says, just because you're living with hearing loss doesn't mean you're good at it. And which can be tied to a lot of some of the direct tips in the book. But there's one thing that the book really emphasizes, and you touched upon the advocacy piece, Shari, and that is, how you advocate for yourself with others, both, for yourself, but also to make the communication better. And there's one line of a friend, I think it's Gail's, who says to people, don't speak to me until I can see the whites of your eyes. So Gail, do you have insights for us in terms of how you very directly ask people for the things you need to make things better interactions?
It's a skill. It's taken a lifetime to do this. But as you said, I don't always follow my own good advice. It's things happen in the moment. Communication happens in the moment. That's what it is. So some things you can plan for, and like presentations, but some it happens in the moment, and depends on who it is and whether they know about my hearing loss. But if they start to talk, they've done a good thing. They've got my attention, but they're turned away a little bit, or there's noise, and they're wearing a ball cap. That would be my husband. These are all things that I can't communicate clearly unless those things are fixed. So I'm very open, probably not as 100% like I think Shari is, but I would, sorry. And by the way, sorry, they say you shouldn't apologize for your hearing loss. I'm Canadian. We bump into a wall, we apologize. So I see it as a figure of speech that gets you to the next bit that you want to talk about. Sorry, I have hearing loss. Could you face me? Could you turn a bit this way? Could you take off your ball hat, darling? Could you do whatever you need to do? And when I don't, so those are the things that I do sometimes automatically. When I don't do it, it's when I get into trouble. And why don't I do it? Well, maybe there's more than just you and I, or Shari and I talking. And once you get more than two people, that's a different ball game. So now you're dealing with a crowd that you need to manipulate to make it a better hearing situation. And I know how to do that. We talk about in the book how to do that, but sometimes I don't. Why don't I? Well, too much work. I'm too tired. I can't control the noise. All of these things that I would normally ask for. So, but I have gotten better at it. And what one thing that I said here, every situation is different, but my needs are constant, and it just depends on how I handle it. But as I said at the beginning, it's a skill. You can get better at it. I started getting better at it when I was 40, and I'm still getting better at it. So
you also have the acronym HEAR, HEAR, in the mind shift, in a portion of the book to lead people through certain things. Can you go through a little bit about the pieces of HEAR?
So absolutely. And that's what we are calling a communication game changer. So we have a section of the book where we talk about sort of these non-technical things that you can do, these behavior changes really, where you can adjust the listening situation to improve your ability to communicate. And here is really one of our favorites. So it's a communication checklist to determine what needs to change in any communication situation and how to do it. So the first step is hearing check. And that's basically, can I understand what my communication partner is saying? And if it's yes, great. But if it's no, then we go through the steps. And the next thing is to evaluate. And that's really to figure out, what do I need to do to improve the situation? Now, these could be environmental things like I need more light, or I need a different seat, like at that Thanksgiving table. But it could also be things about your communication partner, like they need to speak louder or slower, or they need to uncover their mouth. And you can also look at your tech tools, right, to see if an app or an accessory might help. And then the third step is to articulate. And this is often the hardest part, which is telling others what you need. But you cannot skip this step, because we have to ask for what we need for better communication. Otherwise, we're probably not going to receive it. So it's important to learn to do this assertively, not aggressively, because then you get usually a better result if you can assert for your needs, but not do it in a way that is off-putting to other people. And I think it's important to keep in mind that articulating our needs creates a situation where the communication partner also benefits. So it's not just a purely selfish endeavor. It's really creating better communication for everyone in that situation. And then the last piece of it is called revise and remind. So maybe a musician shows up and the noise level picks up, or sometimes your communication partner will slip back into old speech patterns that make it difficult to understand. So you just go back through the steps when the listening situation changes, even if it's just to remind people of what you had already suggested. But we love it because here is very simple and it's effective. And with practice, it really becomes second nature.
Yes, and once you have the categories in your head as you're going through things, okay, maybe I need to make a pause and go back. And I want to get into a couple of the categories. Tech is one of them. But I do think just the simplicity of the acronym and what to do with each of those pieces of the acronym will hopefully be empowering and helpful to people. But there can be, all focusing on self-empowerment and advocacy continually can be exhausting at times. And so one of the things that I noted is, as I was going through the book, is what you say, Gail, which is, you give yourself at least one day a year to have a bad hearing day.
I do. And I actually allow myself more than one bad day. I always say, I really should say 3, but one bad hearing day is, I never get tired of talking about hearing loss, but sometimes I just I get tired of having it. And I get tired, period. I'm physically tired or emotionally tired. And when that happens, communication becomes tired. It doesn't become as effective as it should. And things happen, embarrassing moments happen. The life with hearing loss is when you cut people off, you speak too loudly, all of these, or you just can't get what's being said. And on days like that, I just sometimes allow myself to rage a little bit. Not that, well, maybe I might, my husband puts up with a lot, but, you just vent. You're not your normal self. You're not communicating as well. And I forgive myself for that. And that's a big thing that we talk about in Here and Beyond, that you got to keep trying, you got to keep practicing, and you have to forgive yourself and others when we're not perfect communicators, and try again tomorrow. And but I really do feel every once in a while, I just a little cleansing rage, a bad hearing day is actually that's not a bad thing, as long as I don't hurt someone else in the process.
Yeah, Shari, do you feel the same?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what I think is so interesting about hearing loss, is that it's really a journey, right? It's not something where you can find the solution or the key and unlock it. It's something that's always changing. And we just got to kind of roll with the punches. And so, if there's a rage day, that's great. Or I also use a lot of yoga and meditation to try and deal with the frustration of hearing loss, because it's frustrating. And so each of us have to find ways to manage that, pick ourselves back up and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to start living skillfully again. Because as Gail said, I think at the beginning, it is something that you can get better at, right? With practice and with these skills, you can live better with hearing loss. And that's such an important message for us in this book, because we really want everyone to live well with their hearing loss.
Well, in continuing the conversation along the journey, I mean, there may be people who have a great bag of tricks that works for them, but there may be things in the book that are new thoughts for them. So you emphasize in the book, I think the phrase you use is refresh and renew. That usually around technology, that every few years you reconsider the technology you're using, and maybe there are new things coming out. But when you talk about refreshing and restarting, it could be, I would imagine, thinking about starting yoga or meditation if it's not yet in your bag of tricks, but it could also be about technologies and learning about new technologies or other things that are available. So when you talk about refreshing and restarting, Gail, maybe you can talk to this, what that entails.
Yeah, it's again, it's a big part of what we do, what we talk about. So I'm a woman in my 60s, so refreshing and restarting is a daily process. So, the body changes, that your hearing changes, and this it's not just technology that changes. It's your hearing may drop, or your life situation might change, your stress, levels. You might have a new communication partner in your life that you have to train all over again to communicate. So it's really important to see these as part of the journey, and that, yes, so the journey is meandering. It's never a straight line. This is what you have to do to get from here to there. It's a path, it's a journey, and it has many people on that journey with it. Sometimes, and we talk about, sometimes we just got to pull over to the side of the road for a little bit and reassess where we're at. And then we might have to say, I think I'm going to go back a couple exits, and then, do whatever I have to do, whether it's a technology or the health, that sort of thing. And I just wanted to throw something else in there about that journey and refreshing and restarting, how important it is to know that we're not alone on that journey, and that other people in our lives have impact on our journey. Shari and I writing the book, it was, I reached out to her. I wanted to write another book. I kind of knew what I didn't want to do it by myself. And I knew Shari not that well. I went, she's the one. Hopefully she'll do this. And we did. And it was an interesting process to write it. But at one point it became very joyous. It maintained, we just saw each other a few days ago for the first time physically in 4 years. But it's that having someone with you and helping you along on that journey. And we discovered, as we wrote, we went deeper into our own lives with hearing loss. So it's an important aspect of the hearing loss journey, that it's always going to change, got to refresh and restart.
And part of that is, well, Shari, maybe I should ask you this, because Gail just said you're a little more the technology than her, but you talk about technology and refreshing and restarting. You tell a story about how you were on vacation, which I guess is when this always happens, right? And your hearing aid, you had problems, and you had to figure out how how to get what you needed during that period of time with alternative technologies. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that and how it led you to talk in the book about thinking about technologies, in an evolving way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we were in China. We were visiting China. This was many, many years ago before the pandemic and everything. And my hearing aids died. I think it was just so hot and so humid. I don't know what it was, but they basically kind of melted and they just weren't working. And we had, another week or so of touring to continue. And I was all of a sudden the deafest I had ever been. And I was not very well prepared. Shame on me. I should have been reading this book that didn't exist back then. So I really had to do a scramble and figure out, okay, what can I do to salvage this situation? And I reached out to my hearing loss network, and I discovered that there were a number of different apps that I could use so I went to the store and got some headphones, so Bose noise canceling headphones, plugged them in, and I started using my iPhone and this ear machine app as basically a pocket talker. And as long as I was close enough to any tour guide or my dining companions, I was able to communicate. And so for me, what that really means is that hearing aids are amazing and incredible. And I am very grateful for my hearing aids, but they are not the one-stop solution to hearing loss. They're an important piece of it, but I'm a big believer that there are lots of different technologies, and when you combine them together, they work even better. So they make your hearing aids work better if you have a speech-to-text app as well, or if you're willing to do use some other accessory in addition to that. And not just technology, it's really broader than that, because we also need to self-identify. We need to use our communication game changers like here, and we need to have those mind shifts so that we feel comfortable involving other people in our communication needs. And so it's really that whole combination. It's a lot to learn from one experience on a vacation. But like you said, that's always when, disaster strikes. But I was lucky that I was able to reach out to my network and find a solution.
Yeah. I mean, that's always when things happen, right? When you're away from home and you don't have your resources and you have to be creative about what you're doing. But it's also when, new things open up to you too. So speaking of opening up, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about is your thoughts on there's so much more attention right now in the creative space around hearing loss. So there have been a few movies that have gotten quite a lot of attention around hearing loss, and Coda just won so many awards at the Oscars. And so I wanted to, in this moment in time, get your thoughts in terms of how that attention in a creative space and in a popular culture is affecting things positively or negatively from your perspective in terms of perspectives on living with hearing loss.
That's a
Gael,
really
maybe Gael, I can throw that question to you.
Oh, good, because I started to answer it anyway. And because it's a really hot topic right now. Movies like Coda, which was wonderful, and Sound of Metal, which was also wonderful in different ways. But in reality, neither of these movies have really brought worldwide attention specifically on our experience. And that is people who use spoken language and residual hearing and technology and all sorts of things. We are not in the deaf and signing deaf community. 98% of us with hearing related issues, for lack of a better word, are not. And don't get me wrong, I love the movies, and I think that people who sign and who are deaf that it's been wonderful to have this glorious attention brought and better understanding. What it means for us is that when we go somewhere and we ask for accommodation, they go, we've got a sign language interpreter lined up for you. Well, gosh golly, that's wonderful, except I don't use a sign language interpreter. I need captioning. Fighting for captioning has been very challenging through time. It still is. And just because people don't understand the need. That's why We Hear You, which is the documentary that Shari and our other advocates, our close friends, we need more issues. We need more media like that and positive media. But on the other hand, I think I watched Coda with my husband, and we both cried throughout it because it still does highlight so many of the things that are challenges in our lives, like the misunderstanding and putting so much energy in trying to communicate and speaking over people and the embarrassment of it. And my son just watched it last night for the first time, and he said he cried all the way through it because this was so much of what living with mom was like. So it's a mixed bag of benefits, and I think it's still we're headed in the right direction. And that's why Shari and I, our passion for advocacy is helping and wanting other people to understand what our needs are, and that we feel comfortable and not shamed in asking to have our needs met.
Well, let me build on that with what is likely my final question. You never know, you may say something and I'll have more questions to come. But what I wanted to end with on that note, Gail, is what else is needed in this conversation, in addition to the pop culture and in addition to your book. Is there anything that you weren't able to capture in the book that the two of you would really like to give attention to in the future, either on your own in your comedy, Gail, or Shari in your writing, that you just couldn't fit into this book, but is very much on your mind?
I'm gonna lob that to my new best friend / writing partner, favorite person in the world, Shari Eberts, because we were talking about that, Shari. So yeah.
That's right. And we've really tried to get, almost everything that we know about hearing loss into this book. But the tricky thing about hearing loss is that it's always changing. And so I am sure that there's going to be another story that happens for either of us tomorrow that, oh man, I wish we could have put that into the book. Or there's a new technology tool that comes up. Or there's a new challenge that comes up, right? The pandemic came out of nowhere and we had to restructure and relearn and create new skills. So it's just a living, breathing animal. And we are going to be out there continuing to communicate about hearing loss, because as Gail said, is one of our favorite topics to talk about. So we will definitely have continued writing and continued opportunities, I think, to share our thoughts and really communicate and meet with other people with hearing loss and share our stories.
We hope you do. And one of the pieces that we hope we'll be speaking with other leaders in the field in the coming months is the doing that not only in the audiologist setting, but in the hospital setting as well, and other care settings where the providers are really understanding what you pointed out, Gail, which is it's wonderful that there's the access to sign language in healthcare settings, but there is a long way to go in terms of access to the other supports that individuals with hearing loss need. So that's a piece we hope we can talk about in the future as well with some of your colleagues in the space. But we really hope, we're really grateful. I'm very grateful. You took time out of what is really busy leading into the release of this book. But as soon as we read a preview of the content, we just really felt very sincerely that people would find great value in it. And people, as we've used the word journey quite a bit in our conversation, but regardless of where people are, and their own personal journey. There's just so much richness in the book that we genuinely feel that people will get quite a bit out of it. So we feel very honored that we could share some time with you in what is a very busy time for both of you. And the humor in the book really too just carries you through in terms of finding joy in things. So thank you both. I'm so glad that the three of us got some time together, and I hope I know there are other things on the horizon for both of you. So I hope we'll be together again talking about those in the very near future. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And if people want to learn more about the book, they can visit hereandbeyond.com.
Yes, and we'll share a link so that people can easily access it, because that's the whole goal of having you both on. So
Thank
you
you
both
so much.
again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Overheard at Frequency. Many thanks again to Shari Eberts and Gael Hannan for joining us. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to hear more conversations like this one. Overheard at Frequency was created by Suzanne Day, Colleen Chapman, Jason Glashow, Michael Schubert, Dina Grug, and Zach Russo, and is produced and designed by Daniel Stanish and Diego Chavez. Thank you for listening.